Welcome to Historical Context with the historian and Alfred, the guest star. The historian is me. This is Alfred. Now, in the Happy Hollister book, the family stops at something called a motor court. And it seems funny to us today, because normally today you would stop at a hotel or a motel by the side of the road if you were on a road trip and you had to stop overnight. But in the first half of the 20th century, up until the mid-1950s, it was much more common to stop at a motor court. And these started being created in the early 20th century. They developed during the 1930s. It was very common to have the style of motor court that we see in the book, which is many individual little cabins. And they prided themselves on being very homey, having nice decor, having nice comfy beds. And this is something that people wanted from these motor courts. Now, during World War II, building materials were scarce. Everything was being used for the war. And so it became a lot more common, instead of having little individual cabins, to have everything connected, more what we would think of as a motel. Being a tourist by going on a road trip, the Great American Road Trip, this had been a very common way to go on vacation, a very popular way to go on vacation, up until the mid-20th century. People would not endure a car ride to get somewhere. The vacation would be the car ride. You would go on a road trip, and you would stay in these motor courts along the way. That started to change around 1956, when President Eisenhower would have been president during a lot of the Happy Hollisters books, when he signed the act that would create the interstate highways. This was intended to streamline travel across America, potentially, if it was necessary, to be able to transport the army. This is the Cold War. And a lot of these interstate highways bypassed the old motor courts that had existed. And because they no longer had traffic, they often couldn't survive. And so in 1956 was basically the demise of the motor court, especially the small, individually owned, family business type of motor court, which is what we see in the book. The Happy Hollisters stay at one of these older style travel courts that had individual cabins, and so it wouldn't probably have been newly built in the book. It probably would have been one that was left over from a few decades previous, because it was the older style that had little individual cabins. And we encounter in the book the man who owned it. This was not owned by a company, it was owned by family, apparently. And this is something that really kind of stopped existing after the 1950s, along with really the heyday of the Great American Road Trip. And so we see in the Happy Hollisters that they stay in this motor court, which not long after the book was published in 1953, not long after the book, it would have been pretty unlikely for a person to stay at one of those. And so that was, in a sense, a relic. The Happy Hollisters is letting us get a glimpse of something that really doesn't exist anymore, which is kind of cool.